Hello everyone and welcome to the first video of this channel. I'm so excited to launch a new channel in English. This will be about technology and smart homes, and if those are areas that you like, please consider subscribing. You can be the first one to do it. The first rule of thumb of this channel is no blah blah blah, no introductions, no losing time. Yours and mine are precious. So let's move on and go straight to the point. The reason why you are here and you click on this video. We'll be checking the news of Home Assistant new release 2022.5. And we start with news with rearrangements on the now called settings menu. So the core thing is quite the same. Device and services have the same menu, also for automation and scenes, but we now have this system rearranged and have sub items that at first can make no sense because they have little information. So in storage you have the used space only, and you may think, okay, for this we can just add it on the network hardware or system health. What we were told about is that Home Assistant is doing this to minimize the number of changes on the GUI, these structural changes, and then be prepared to grow information inside each of these sub items. One thing that I really like is the restart shortcut on the top right. I personally use shortcuts with my keyboard, so I click C and then restart server, but if you don't do it, well, you now have here a restart, quite easy to use. And another thing that you might find missing is the configuration check, also the reloads for specific core parts of the Home Assistant, and those are now on developer tools. So you have here a new tab, YAML tab, and here we are, you have the check and you can reload specific zones or specific things on Home Assistant. Booleans, buttons, usually scripts. This panel is just the same as before, but now it is on developer tools. Another quite usual shortcut is this magnifying viewer. If you are building your dashboards and you want to know the entities that you have available, then you just click here and start typing to filter, for instance, for lights. Then again, this is nothing new. I already used it with the shortcut E on my keyboard. If you want, you can use it too. If not, well, it is much simpler because now visually you can see those magnifying glasses, and you click and boom, you have the entities list to choose from to build your dashboard. Quite useful. And if you love automations and scripting of Home Assistant, then you are in luck. Thank you, Frank, for all the developments done on this release. Let's check them one by one. And let's start with a quite simple but much requested feature, if then else. This flow is present in every programming language, so if you are a developer, you are already familiar with this flow. If you are not, don't worry, this is quite easy to understand. You put a condition under the if statement, and then if it's true, you follow the actions under the then. If it's not true, you can use the else as optional to define a different path of actions. Let's see an example to understand this better. So you have the if. Right here, the condition is if zone home is state 0, so if no one is home. The then is if this condition returns true, then you will run these actions, in this case start vacuum. If not, then you do the actions under the else part. So in this case, just notify that cleaning has been skipped because people are in home. And this was already possible to do with the shoes option. So I have here an example. The shoes also have condition and then the sequence of action associated with a condition. The difference being shoes allow you to configure multiple conditions. So you don't have only one path, left or right. You have multiple paths in the middle, and you can define multiple conditions. In this example, I'm checking if we are at nighttime, and then I turn on 2 bulbs with brightness 1 if it's night. If not, it will go to the default, so default being like the else statement, and I'm turning them on with 100% of brightness. In the if then else, I can just replace everything that I have here. So the choose is the if, the condition is the same, the sequence is the then, and the default is the else. But if I want, for instance, a more complex example, to have different brightness on different periods of time of the day, I'm not able to do that with the if then else, because if then else allows you only 2 path of actions and 1 condition. With the shoes you can have multiple conditions and multiple path of actions. Moving on, calendar trigger. Now I don't use calendar in Home Assistant, but this can be the trigger for me to change that, because now you can run your automations based on event start or event end in events within a calendar integrated with Home Assistant. For most of us it will be Google Calendar, so we have our Gmail accounts that have a calendar associated with and that you can easily integrate with Home Assistant, and then The example that you have here on the release notes is the most common one, so you want to be notified somehow for your mobile every time that a special event starts on your calendar. But I believe that this is just a small part of it, because calendars are a really nice way to manage all your time-based automations. Okay, so I just created this new calendar and added 3 new events taking leverage of the Google Calendar engine. I associated this with Home Assistant, and now I can just use Google Calendar for what it's best, dealing with events. I can make slightly adjustment, I can change the title, I can change recurrency, so I can say this event is only for the weekend, and I can have a way to clearly see every day what's running. So I take leverage of Google engine, and then I associate these events with automations on Home Assistant. And the way I'm thinking about it, I've not tested it yet, is to use this trigger variable. So every time an automation starts with this calendar trigger, you will have these variables available on the condition and action side of the automation. So one of them is this summary, that is the title of the event. So every time that this event triggers, because I have an automation with event start, I will check in the condition if the summary is turns if you present light off, and if it is, I'll move forward and the action will be called the turn off on this light. So I think this might work, and it will be really nice to take leverage of both worlds. And again, so Google to do this graphic event management, and then Home Assistant to deal with the automations behind every event. So the next is for each loop. Now we can do for each on Home Assistant automations. For those that are developers, they already know how this works. For others, you do the for each every time that you want to run a set of actions on top of a list of items. Let's say you want to turn on at a certain brightness a bunch of lights. You create a list with those lights, and then you use this repeat.item and the entity ID of each light. In the example that we have here, we have a list of objects with 2 variables, language and message, and then we access that information here on the sequence part of the automation, and Home Assistant will repeat all this sequence and replace this repeat item.language and repeat item.message for the values that we define here on the list. Was it clear? I hope it is. You can now disable any trigger condition or action. It's quite simple. You just need to select the item, and then in the GUI you just click enable or disable. It will reflect on the YAML with the enabled flag that will be true or false. This way you can test more freely your automations and remove conditions that don't make sense in the test phase, and then enable them again when the automation goes live. Next is a feature that I'm missing a lot in my current automations, and now I have available in this new version: continue on error. So sometimes you have a sequence of actions, and even though all the actions are important, you may want to continue with the next action even though the first one failed. This is what continue on error do. So you just add this flag to true on an action, and even if it fails, for instance, if it fails to notify you on mobile, you know that still the next actions will be executed. So quite useful, because a lot of times you have a sequence and not every actions are showstopper for the automation. Now you can guarantee that. One side note, this is only available on YAML, what is a little bit strange because I believe it's due to time, and in the next release this will be migrated to the GUI, because this is just a flag, so there is no reason, and it's not something so complex that couldn't be added to the GUI like the for each statement. So I believe that in the next versions this will be migrated for the GUI as well. But the universe always finds a balance, and now that not all your errors stop your automation, you can stop it with an action. So if you use these stop actions that is available on the UI, you guarantee that further actions are not run. This is quite useful if used with the if statement. So if a given condition is checked, you just divert the flow to a stop action and nothing more is executed. And now you can parallelize actions on Home Assistant. This is quite difficult to say. Parallelize. Although I never felt the need for this, my actions run really fast and they can run sequentially. That's not a problem for me, and I don't anticipate any use case for use parallelization. This is now available on Home Assistant. Just be aware that if both actions write to the same variable, you will lose control which one writes first, and you may end up losing data. So very cautious using these parallelizing actions. And the next feature is JSON migration. Something that was already available in the YAML is now migrated to the UI. This is the path I think Home Assistant will follow in the future to become less geek and more accessible to all users. So now in the UI you can define the trigger state with multiple entities as source. Good job. The next one is really useful for entities that can have multiple states. Now you can create a trigger with the not matching to and from. If you want to do a trigger and leave outside the unavailable and unknown states, you don't have to list all the other states like before. You can just say not from, unavailable and unknown. Only if the from state are these ones, the trigger will not be triggered. The automation will not be triggered. The trigger will not be set. Okay, you get the point. So for entities with a lot of possible states, this is quite useful. You now can invert the logic of the trigger so that it will not come from some state or not to some state. And what used to be a gauge card with 3 thresholds can now have 5 thresholds and define these green optimal values from which you are moving away in both directions. You start entering those yellow and then the red values. So you can define 5 thresholds, quite useful for temperature and humidity, for instance. Thank you, Netzwerkfeller. Sorry. And that's it. Those are the big changes that I wanted to bring you in this video. Please read the release notes because there are a ton of other minor changes. Also read the breaking changes to guarantee a smooth upgrade 50 days after the release and 5 versions with minor bug corrections. I think the code is now quite stable for a smooth upgrade. Don't leave your instance of Home Assistant back. Upgrade, Commander! And you may have noticed this is the first video of this channel. This is my first English talking video, so even if you don't know me or if you know me from the Portuguese channel, please leave your feedback on the comments below. That will be much appreciated and help me improve. I will see you in the next one, or as we say in Portuguese, ciao!